your cooperation. Now we have item number 3 in the name of Deputy Dennis Naughton and Brian Stanley, an issue that's very close to my own heart, I must say, and I want to welcome Minister Bruton in to deal with this. Gentlemen, you have 2 minutes each. I presume we're starting with Deputy Naughton.
Thank you, Catherine. The local TDs, including you, Deputy Murphy and Deputy Stanley, had a meeting with the Bordnamona group of unions yesterday. They informed us at that meeting that the company is currently borrowing money on a day-to-day basis to pay its staff. The public service obligation finishes for Loughree Power on the 9th of December next, and on the 31st of December for West Offaly Power. This is a completely unsustainable situation. We are now facing an economic catastrophe across the middle of Ireland in just 68 days' time, with the loss of 2,000 direct jobs and another 2,000 jobs that are dependent on the wage packets from these employees. We need 3 urgent and immediate steps to be taken by you, Minister Bruton. 1. A clear, unambiguous statement from Government reiterating its support for the co-firing of the 2 plants with both peat and biomass, as per the unanimous request from all of the TDs in Tullamore to you, Minister, last July. Secondly, that, Minister, you immediately call in the chief executives of both Bordnamona and the ESB to get absolute clarity on the intention to submit a new planning application for West Offaly and to deal with the 3 million tonnes of milled peat that are on the bogs presently and has the potential to cause serious environmental harm if not removed from the bogs. And thirdly, to immediately release funds from the Climate Action Fund to start the rehabilitation of the decommissioned bogs across the Midlands. And as you know, Minister, I have written to you directly on foot of correspondence that I have received from the Taoiseach, who is supportive of the release of funding from the Climate Action Fund to start the rehabilitation and allow for immediate employment of staff in Bordnamona across the Midlands.
Thank you, Deputy Naughton. I must always say you're spot on time in every debate, and I appreciate that in the chair. Now, Deputy, you have
thanks, Laskin Corla, and I just want to acknowledge your presence as well at the meeting yesterday. I was asked to call it last week by the unions, and I think it's a very fruitful meeting. But obviously, it's a dire situation that we're facing in Bordnamona. There are huge problems at the moment. They're facing a perfect storm, and indeed, there's huge uncertainty. Workers are uncertain. They're not sure whether they have a job in 2 or 3 weeks' time or not, never mind in 2 or 3 months. Senior management have said that there are seismic changes going to take place, and this will have a huge effect right across the Midlands, and particularly in West Offaly. The PSO, as previous speaker said, will end in December for the 2 peat burning stations at Shannon Bridge and at Loughree. There are the 3 million tonnes of fuel on the bog. There has been no price agreed with ESB, I'm informed, as regards that, no price per tonne. And we have the decision from a board Pleanála to refuse planning permission for co-fuelling at Shannon Bridge, and the licence for that ends in December 2020. No judicial review has been sought for that, and we raised this with you back in July, 30th of July, when we met you in Tullamore regarding it. And if you take Durnlock Briquette Factory, the future of that's threatened because it needs modernisation. It's also facing threats in terms of carbon tax increases and smokeless fuel ban. The horticultural sector, Coolnamona and Kilberry, are hanging on a thread. There's peat stockpiled on the bogs. I saw it again last Sunday. And the decision by the British retailer B&Q to refuse compost that has a peat fraction in it, that's obviously posing a threat. So workers in Laois and South Kildare also, they can't just be thrown in the scrap heap. What's needed, Minister, is there's 30 million there from the Climate Action Fund to secure jobs and to commence the rehabilitation of bogs, which is needed to be done, and we need a proper plan for each bog. We need to just transition to finance the voluntary severance fund, because we have workers there with no work at the moment. We need investment in alternative employment, we need training and upskilling in new industries, and we need to protect the reasonable conditions of employment and underpin, very importantly, the company's pension scheme, because there are now nearly more pensioners than workers because of the historical situation where Bordnamona implied many multitudes of what's there at the moment, many thousand more than what's there at the moment. So time is of the essence, Minister, with this.
And you both will have a minute each in a few moments. Minister, you're welcome. 4 minutes to give us all the answers.
like to thank both deputies for raising this. I know the intensity of feeling that there is. I suppose just to say a few things. Firstly, in the context of the Climate Action Plan, just transition is at the very heart of that, and government have recognised that those who are most exposed to the impact of the climate transition that we're undergoing have to be protected in this context, and we have to support people. And there is no doubt that the co-firing plan, which was government policy and was supported, it allowed a phased withdrawal from peat. The result of the decision of Bord Pleanála is being intensely reviewed. I would say to Deputy Stanley that judicial review is a very particular type of challenge to a decision. It refers to a failure in the procedures, and clearly that's different from what is now being assessed as to whether a planning application can be made that can meet the requirements of the board, and that's what ESB is currently evaluating. But as you know, the first thing that I did when this information became public, not only did I meet with yourselves in the public reps, but I met with the work directors of the company. I met with the Oireachtas Midland representatives, the Midland Regional Transition Team, the Regional Enterprise Team, the Regional Skills Forum, and recently I met the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. And what we have done on foot of that July Cabinet meeting, we set up at that meeting an interdepartmental group led by the Department of Taoiseach, to work on the Just Transition Plan, so to prepare for different contingencies that might arise in this context. And that work is ongoing, and there will be several strands to the government's approach. There will be the elements of diversification within Bord Namona, and I do acknowledge Deputy Naughton's submission to me, which dealt with particular elements of that. There will also be the focus on accelerated programme of bog restoration, and indeed I think many recognise that that is an area that we can work on, perhaps not just in Bord Namona bogs, but in bogs further afield. There are also needs for other regional initiatives in respect of rural, urban, enterprise developments that can support the transition, not just for the individual workers concerned, but also for the wider communities. So I can assure you that government is giving this very intensive attention. In addition, we have secured the agreement that the Midlands will be part of the platform for coal and other carbon-intensive regions, and a team will be visiting from the EU to provide advice on the support that can come from that direction. At this point, there is no funding from the EU committed to, but the new Commission is certainly looking more favourably at that. So I recognise that this is a time when we do have to show our capacity to breathe reality into the words just transition for those who are working in the Midlands and for the many people who are dependent on those jobs as part of the Midlands, the operation of the Midlands economy. So we are working on that, and I think the deputies raising this is timely, as indeed was Deputy Marcella Corcoran-Kennedy raised this last week also, and I understand that in the constituencies involved there is intense concern about this, and I can assure you that it's getting very considerable attention from government as we prepare for the contingencies that might arise.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Naughton.
Minister, by Christmas Day, 2,000 people across the Midlands could be without a job, with a further 2,000 people looking to the new year in despair with the likely loss of their job also. Can I ask you, Minister, if you will give a commitment here on the floor of the House that you will bring in the Chief Executive of the ESB and of Bord Namona and provide the public with absolute clarity in terms of a new planning application and in terms of what will be done with the 3 million tonnes of peat that is on the bog at present? Can you clarify here to the House that we have already missed the boat now in terms of a judicial review, because that date has now expired and that we are now talking about a new application? And I think we're all committed to a just transition, Minister, but what we need is that backed up by cash, and there needs to be cash put into the budget next week to implement that just transition next week, not next year or the year after. And finally, Minister, we need to put a just transition plan in place, something along the lines of the one that has been put in place in Spain, where they are decommissioning the coal industry in Spain. And I will present your office with a copy of that plan, and that could be used as a template for what needs to be done, and needs to be done urgently across the Midland counties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Stanley, a minute.
I have to say, Minister, that, and just to concur with what has been said by the previous speaker, time is of the essence here. The situation we heard yesterday, and from what we know, those of us who have been following this issue and been making extensive representations on it, know that that time isn't on our side here, because literally we're doing a 25 or 30 year catch-up. The budget next week, as has already been said, this issue needs to be dealt with next week in relation to that, and from the Climate Action Fund. That funding needs to be released, and workers need some certainty. Workers don't know whether to have a job in 2, 3 or 4 weeks' time. That is the reality. I have met workers in the last week that don't know that. We were supposed to have a climate emergency. We have declared it here and we accept that. Bord na Móna is now part of that emergency. And in the government's programme for government, you said that the Department with responsibility for agriculture and energy policy will explore with Bord na Móna the potential for energy crops which can be grown in the vicinity of Bord na Móna plants. Now, I've been hammering this issue for years. Has that happened? Is that underway? And just to conclude, the Minister needs to sit down with the two CEOs of Bord na Móna and ESB, because the two companies are linked on this issue, and set out a way forward and inform us of that. You need to make a statement regarding the coal-firing, that it's government policy to coal-fire with peat and biomass. And the last issue is the government needs to give a clearer policy direction, Ceann Comhairle, in relation to biomass, biogas, wind and solar and forestry, the new industries that are going to be needed to replace peat. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle, for your...
First of all, I'd like to assure the deputies that I have already met with both CEOs, and they are, the ESB in particular, is intensively assessing its options in the light of the decision by On Board Pleanála. I should clarify, for the sake of the House, though, that the decision in respect that Bord Pleanála has made is being made in respect of West Offaly. The application from Loughree is with Longford County Council. And the Eden Derry has a permission for co-firing up to 2023. So the facts aren't, I don't think that came clear from the contributions. I am absolutely very intensively aware that this is a really serious threat, and that we have to take this very seriously. We have to seek to manage to get the best outcome for the workers. I met with the workers. I am very much aware of their concerns, their expectations of work that they had based on the co-firing approach. If that co-firing approach can't go ahead, we need to be considering the contingencies that can replace that for those workers involved. And we are looking at all of those options to make sure that we are in a position to make decisions that will be in the interests of the workers and the region, and of course the wider context that we're working on the Climate Action Plan. So I can assure the deputies that this is a top priority in my department, and it is getting the attention it deserves.